Welcome to Inside Report. I'm your host, Bruce Schlesman. With me today, we have a very special guest, Ben Shapiro from the Daily Wire. He's the editor-in-chief over in there. We're here to talk about the Mueller Report, Bill Barr, and other very important issues going on right now. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So first question, I just wanted to ask about the Mueller Report. It's expected to come out real soon. I've heard as soon as Thursday morning, actually. What can we expect to learn from the full Mueller Report being released?
Well, I think that what we will probably learn is that President Trump had more conversations about how much he dislikes Robert Mueller than we thought. That's pretty much what I'm expecting, because I'm not seeing a lot of evidence. Democrats are not even trying to claim that there's going to be a lot there on the collusion front, that suddenly we're going to get some revelation about Trump calling up Vladimir Putin from a skiff and then trying to manipulate the elections with his cooperation. I don't think you're going to see that. I think you are going to see a lot of conversations between Trump and top-ranking officials, him and Don McGahn, for example, about what can I do to circumscribe this investigation? What can I do to stop Mueller from looking too deeply into my finances? That sort of stuff. Because that's what the Bill Barr letter originally stated. I mean, Attorney General Barr's letter originally stated that there was conflicting evidence on the obstruction stuff. There wasn't enough to charge, and so he wouldn't be charging on that, and that there was no evidence of actual collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Now, on the Russia stuff, you may see some unwitting use of information by members of the Trump campaign, but that would not be controversial or shocking at this point. We already know that that was happening on a fairly regular basis, with WikiLeaks putting out stuff and then the Trump campaign basically amplifying a lot of that stuff. So I don't think there's going to be a ton there. I think there'll be some stuff that makes Trump look a little bit worse. I don't think that there's going to be a bombshell to the extent that everybody says, well, Trump certainly should have been prosecuted for collusion for this one, and obviously Barr and Mueller missed it. I don't think that's going to happen.
So do you think this allays Democrats' concerns where we have a lot of ongoing investigations, or at least threats of ongoing investigations that are going to happen? Do you think releasing the full Mueller report actually does anything to allay those, and maybe that goes away?
No, I mean, I don't think that for Democrats these are real concerns in the first place. I don't think that Democrats are deeply concerned that President Trump obstructed justice here or that he colluded with Russia or any of that. I think now it's a CYA maneuver by Democrats. They have to continue complaining that there is continuing obstruction, this time via Attorney General Barr. I think they'll continue to push that message. The real reason to release the report has nothing to do with motivated Democrats who, after all, hate President Trump and want to take him down no matter what the method. I think the real motivation here, obviously, is that the American people get to read as much of the underlying material as possible. After all, we spent 2 years kind of rehashing a bunch of rumors and now getting down to the nuts and bolts of what exactly Mueller found. I think that will be good for Americans to see. I think Americans should see it. Hell, we spent $25 million on it.
Okay, so doubling back to that, you think it's a good idea to release the Mueller report in full. Do you think redactions is going to help or hurt that process, or do you just want to see the full Mueller report out there?
Well, I mean, I do think that you have to have redactions just as legally necessary. Grand jury information is full of all sorts of people giving unverified testimony, and you could see people running wild with that. I mean, they ran wild with the allegation completely unverified in the Steele dossier that Trump had Russian prostitutes pee on him. So you could see all sorts of that kind of stuff in grand jury reports that really would implicate innocent people, and that would be a problem. That's why it violates the federal rules of criminal evidence to release grand jury information without any sort of redactions protecting anybody. So the redactions are legally necessary. I think that there's a reason that those rules exist. With that said, aside from the redactions, as much of the report should be released as can be released, because the American people do deserve to see, after all this time, what exactly we paid for.
So we've had a pretty small sample size of the job of Attorney General of Bill Barr, but how do you think, what kind of job do you think he's done so far in his short tenure?
I mean, so far so good. I haven't seen any drawbacks. Robert Mueller has not been grousing about how William Barr has been trying to stymie him in any way. And despite Democrat attempts to paint Barr as some sort of rabid partisan in the position of Attorney General to protect President Trump, I will note, I will note just as a side point here that Eric Holder was calling himself Barack Obama's wingman while he was the Attorney General, and Loretta Lynch was meeting with Bill Clinton on tarmacs. So I do not take great stock of Democrats complaining about the partisanship of attorney generals. I mean, Janet Reno was the attorney general. So, but putting that aside, I haven't seen any evidence that Barr is trying to cover up for President Trump here. And their attempts to paint the letter, the 4-page letter that he released, as the final word on the Mueller report is silly. He said in the letter that he was going to be releasing the full Mueller report as soon as possible. He testified that he would do that under oath. So what exactly is the complaint about Barr at this point, other than he's a convenient villain and Democrats are looking for one?
Yeah, it kind of seems like with the summary, 4 or 5 page summary, they just claimed it wasn't enough, and now they need the full Mueller report. It's like you said, he already said he was going to release it.
Exactly. And once he says that, now you get to judge what he releases. I mean, we're going to know in the next 48 hours exactly how much he was fibbing, if anything there. Democrats kind of preemptively setting the groundwork that there's been a cover-up before there's any evidence of a cover-up is pretty obvious politicking.
Yeah, well put. With the Mueller probe, going back to that, their conduct has been something of question, especially in Republican circles. Kind of a lot of questions, a lot of shady stuff that's been going on, and more questions than answers. How do you think the probe is done as far as its conduct?
I mean, I'm not going to know that until I actually see the report, but as far as the early conduct of the FBI during the campaign, there's some serious questions to be asked about the FISA warrant that was taken out against Carter Page. There's some serious questions to be asked about how suspicious were the members of the intelligence community about Trump and his campaign himself, and were those suspicions justified? Now, Barr got this right. There's no question that members of the Trump campaign were surveilled. The question is whether that surveillance was justified or whether it was even remotely explainable. If it was explainable and it turns out there was nothing there, well, listen, that's what the police do all the time. I mean, the police are constantly investigating things that they can't actually prosecute. The DOJ does that all the time. An investigation does not have to result in a prosecution for the investigation to be proper. But when you have people like Peter Strzok heading up the investigation itself, it does raise questions as to how much he was interested in getting Trump. And if getting Trump was such a top priority, does that undermine his ability to do an objective job? We already saw that it actually did in the IG report from Michael Horowitz about the Hillary investigation. And that report specifically suggested that Strzok and his colleagues actually put more focus on Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton, and that resulted, ironically, in Hillary maybe losing the election, because for 4 weeks they knew that there was material on Anthony Weiner's computer. They put that on the back burner because they weren't worried about Hillary Clinton. Instead, they were worried about Trump and Operation Crossfire and all the rest of this stuff. And they decided to delay the Hillary revelations until right before the election, at which point Comey looked and said, oh no, we've known about this for a month. Why didn't we do anything about this? And then he issues his letter and Hillary loses the election. So the great irony of Peter Strzok's attempts to take down President Trump, probably President Trump being in the White House in the first place.
So back to Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, all of those things, and the kind of anti-Trump bias that seems to be built in, at least with a number of figures with part of that probe. Do you think that there needs to be an investigation into the conduct of the investigators here?
I think an investigation is warranted, and I think an investigation is already taking place. I don't know that you need another independent investigation. Let's see what the IG has to say. Michael Horowitz is already set to release a Trump-Russia collusion investigation report. We'll know more at that point exactly about what kind of conduct went on. His report on the Hillary investigation was quite thorough. I would expect the same kind of thoroughness from Horowitz.
So the FISA court hearings, or lack thereof, that we were talking about with Spygate and that whole thing with the Steele dossier, where do you think this investigation goes?
Well, I mean, I think
there is an investigation.
Yeah, I mean, if there is an investigation, then I think that it goes to how much did the Obama intelligence apparatus know about the Steele dossier when it was submitted to them? Did they know that all of it was bunked? Did they know all of it was unsubstantiated? And did they use it as an excuse to go after a political opponent? Or did they have actual verified threats that they were looking at? Were they justified in looking at George Papadopoulos and Carter Page and saying, okay, the entire Trump campaign infrastructure is corrupt here? You know, there may be some judgment calls there. It may be that there is bad activity that was not illegal. It may also be that there is activity where it sort of is a Rorschach test, where people on the right go, yeah, obviously Trump was innocent and they decided to target him. And people on the left say, well, not so fast. There was a Trump Tower meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya. There was George Papadopoulos chatting with this professor in London. There was Carter Page traveling over to Russia. You know, that may end up just sort of being what it is, and everybody takes from it what they do. But, you know, it may also end up that we know that Strzok and Page decided to deliberately overvalue certain pieces of bad evidence because they were so concerned with President Trump being president. It wasn't about him being a Russian colluder at all. It was all about them disliking him.
So the Steele dossier seems to be a big part, though, of their ability to get these warrants from a FISA court. You know, obviously there's a lot of questions there. I mean, if the Steele dossier is as big as a part as people are saying, that's a big issue.
It is. I mean, it depends on two things. One, we actually haven't seen the FISA warrant. I've been urging the president to simply declassify that thing for years at this point. Once we see the FISA warrant, we'll know if that was the entirety of the basis for the warrant. Remember that the warrant was renewed a couple of times, and you do need new evidence to renew, apparently. Number two, how much of that was conveyed to the court? How much of the uncertainty about the Steele dossier was conveyed to the court? And how much was it conveyed to the court that it was an Oppo research document? So in one of the footnotes in the letter, it did suggest that this came from an opposing political party. So it was not completely hidden from the court that granted the FISA warrant. It does raise some serious questions, however, about the nature of the FISA courts generally. Can they grant warrants on the basis of extraordinarily thin evidence? How much do you actually have to prove in order to get a warrant in the first place?
That might be part of the problem, too, because a lot of that entire process is shrouded in secrecy. I know Judicial Watch pushed to get those warrants. We've been trying our best, and that's something that we'd like to see happen, too, kind of the truth to come out there. So we'll see what happens. But thank you so much for joining us, Ben. This has been a really enlightening conversation about what's going on with our judicial system and this whole Mueller report.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Inside Report. If you liked what you saw here today, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you support our work here at Judicial Watch, please visit our website and donate to our organization. Thanks so much.